It's hard to forget the first time you got scammed. We all have at least once been a victim of financial fraud. Once you are through it, the moment of despair makes you wonder, am I that insane? Today, we are taking you back into history and exploring the life of the man who pulled off history's financial fraud, Charles Ponzi. Who was he, and how he gave this world a legacy of scams that curtails to this date? Who was Charles Ponzi? Charles Ponzi was an Italian-born swindler and con artist who became infamous for the fraudulent investment scheme that now bears his name, the Ponzi scheme. Born in 1882, Ponzi immigrated to the United States in 1903 and began working on this scheme in the early 1920s. This mastermind promised high returns to investors by exploiting a real arbitrage opportunity involving international postal reply coupons. The smartest thing by Ponzi was that he himself did not invest money in the scheme. After all, who understands the worth of money more than a scammer himself? Ponzi was clever enough to use funds from new investors to pay off earlier investors, creating the illusion of a profitable venture. The man ensured even if the ship sank, he would have nothing to lose. Charles's actions were severe and detrimental. In a blink of an eye, fortunes vanished, thousands were left destitute, banks crumbled, and America's faith in the financial system was shattered. One man's lie brought it all crashing down. But how did it all reach this stage? Were people that insane and greedy for money, or Charles was that convincing? Let's find out. Background. Charles Ponzi, born in the town of Lugo in Italy, had wealthy parents, but by the time of his birth they were considerably poor. Ponzi's financial situation inclined him towards stealing and lying from an early age. He was known to have stolen from his parents and even priests. With the dream of improving his financial condition, he decided to go to America during his university years, which were not very bright either. However, dreams of going to America and making churning money within months curated in his eyes. Entry to America. Mr. Ponzi claimed that he came to Boston in November 1903 with $200. With barely any cash, Ponzi worked on his English-speaking skills and performed off jobs to survive in the United States. He further added that he tried all jobs, from being a sewing repairman to an insurance salesman, from factory and to kitchen help. He tried it all. Some lasted longer than others, but he never admitted in these accounts that he was often fired from these jobs for theft. Ponzi moved places, be it New York or New Haven. He had been everywhere, but the spot that took a turn in his scamming career was Montreal, Canada. This is where he started working as a bank teller but soon lost the job. However, that did not stop him from committing crimes. He was in Quebec jail for 3 years for forgery and also helped smuggle immigrants from Italy to the USA, but eventually he was caught after 2 months in Atlanta. First taste of fraud. Ponzi's first fraud started from coupons. The coupons used for prepaid international postage could be bought cheaply in one country and exchanged for stamps worth more in another, thanks to fluctuating exchange rates after World War I. Ponzi claimed he could exploit this difference for massive profits. In reality, the logistics of converting coupons into cash were impractical, and the profits he promised were impossible to sustain. But that didn't stop him. Instead, he used this idea as the bait, luring in thousands of investors with the promise of extraordinary returns, and unknowingly setting the stage for one of history's most infamous financial schemes. Personal life. But wait a second. Do you think Ponzi was all alone in his criminal journey and spent life in America without anyone by his side? Back in Boston, when he was 35 years old, he noticed a young girl named Rose Necco and fell in love with her in first glance. They married in February 1918, and Ponzi happened to work with his father-in-law's grocery store and his wife's family fruit company as well, but it failed shortly. Nonetheless, Rose always stood by him. She was with him on his journey from rags to riches, and they both experienced living in a 12-room mansion with servants and fancy cars. She stayed with him when the Ponzi scheme failed, and he was deported after the jail. However, their marriage did end in the mid-1930s. Birth of the Ponzi scheme. The Ponzi scheme was born in 1920 when Charles crafted a tantalizing promise that no one could resist: a 50% return on investment in just 45 days, or a whopping 100% in 90 days. Voila! This was the time after World War I. The world was recovering and people were eager to grow their savings, and this scheme seemed like a golden opportunity. With money flowing freely and optimism high, many saw Ponzi's offer as a golden opportunity to capitalize on the post-war recovery. People were looking for quick, high returns, and Ponzi's pitch seemed to offer exactly that. Everyday people, from factory workers to wealthy elites, poured their savings into Ponzi's scheme, believing that they were on the verge of doubling their money in a matter of weeks. The scheme fed on this economic optimism. Investors thought they were benefiting from a clever international financial loophole, but in reality, they were fueling the very machine that would eventually collapse under its own weight. Ponzi's genius wasn't in the postal coupon idea itself, it was in his ability to inspire trust. Ponzi told investors he could achieve this by exploiting a legitimate arbitrage opportunity involving international postal reply coupons. But that was just a front. How Ponzi's scheme worked. At its core, Ponzi's operation was built on a simple but deceptive formula. He took money from new investors to pay off earlier ones, creating the illusion that his business was a roaring success. The early investors, seeing quick returns as promised, became walking advertisements for Ponzi, spreading the word and attracting more people to the scheme. It was a brilliant psychological trap. Everyone thought they could cash in on this opportunity before it was too late. The reality was far more sinister. Ponzi wasn't using the money to buy and sell postal reply coupons as claimed. Instead, he was simply shifting money from one investor to another, making it seem like legitimate profits. This is the classic rob Peter to pay Paul approach. New investors were unknowingly financing the payouts to earlier ones. As long as fresh money kept pouring in, the illusion of success was maintained. Downfall of the Ponzi scheme. All good things come to an end, and the Ponzi scheme, which was never good in the first place, had to see its downfall. It is absolutely brain-wrecking to think that at its peak, Ponzi was raking in $250,000 a day, an unimaginable fortune in 1920. His offices were flooded with investors, and his name was on everyone's lips. Testimonials from early investors who had received their payouts added to the hype. These early backers were proof, it seemed, that Ponzi's method worked. They boasted of their profits, showing off the large returns they had received, which encouraged even more people to invest. Careful to pay these early investors exactly what he promised, making them his biggest advocates. This strategy of feeding success stories back into the public mind further legitimized the scam. Newspapers ran glowing reports of people doubling their money in just a few months. As word spread, ordinary people sold their homes and life savings to invest, convinced that Ponzi's scheme was a surefire way to wealth. However, the ticking time bomb behind the scheme started to become clear. With thousands of new investors piling in, Ponzi needed an ever-growing supply of cash to pay the old ones. The math was impossible. For every $100 investment, he had to find new investors to keep paying out the promised $150 after 45 days. As more people cashed in on their returns, the strain on Ponzi's cash flow grew unbearable. The scheme began to unravel when journalists and financial experts started to ask hard questions. Clarence Barron, a prominent financial analyst, calculated that in order to deliver on his promises, Ponzi would have had to purchase 160 million postal reply coupons. Yet the total number of coupons in circulation globally was only in the thousands. Meanwhile, the Boston Post ran a series of investigative articles uncovering the end of Charles Ponzi. On August 12, 1920, Ponzi was arrested for mail fraud, a serious charge tied to using the postal service to deceive investors. His trial was a media spectacle, as the public had been captivated by his rise and subsequent fall. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 150 years in federal prison. Although his sentence was later reduced, Ponzi ended up serving about 14 years in total across different prison terms. After serving his time in the US, Ponzi's troubles weren't over. In 1934, after his final release from prison, he was deported back to Italy. In exile, Ponzi lived a much humbler life compared to the one he enjoyed during his scheme's heyday. He tried to revive his fortune through various schemes, but none succeeded. Eventually, Ponzi moved to Brazil, where he lived in poverty, working odd jobs. In 1949, at the age of 66, Ponzi died nearly forgotten, a far cry from the powerful and wealthy figure he once was. That's it for today. Share your first experience with a scam in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.